Well, good morning. I've never done this before, so bear with me. I'm going to read a little bit out of Mark chapter 11 and tie it in with Mark chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. In Mark chapter 11, he talks about the fig tree. Jesus and his disciples, they were leaving Bethany, and Jesus was hungry in chapter 12, or verse 12. Now in verse 13, it says, seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. And then in verse 14, he says, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples heard it. Now, I'm going to go over to Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9, and read those. In verse 6, it starts out, then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, for 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Verse 8, Sir, the man replied, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down. So I've been pondering on that for a moment. And why is it relevant? What's the purpose of it? Well, it was on my heart. It's been brought upon my heart for probably 2 or 3 weeks now. The whole deal about the fig tree and Jesus cursing the fig tree. And in all actuality, if I read this correctly, he didn't walk up to the fig tree and say, I curse you. He basically just said, may no one ever eat from your fruit again, in other words. And then later, the disciples heard it, but then later when they came back to it, Jesus walks right by it, and here is the disciples, and they're like, hey, look, the fig tree that you cursed is dead all the way to the roots, man. And so I wanted to go a little different direction, and I started out asking this question. Are you just living, or are you bearing fruit? So where I get this is from is the fig tree itself was alive, and you knew it was alive because it had leaves. Like Jesus said, like they said, Jesus saw that it was bearing fruit, that it had leaves, and he saw it from a distance. But when he got closer, he was hungry. He was ready to partake. He was ready to have what it had to offer. Its purpose was to give fruit. The fig tree's purpose was to grow and bear figs for fruit to eat, for others to partake of. That's its purpose. And so, again, in Mark 11, chapter 11, verse 13, he saw the fig tree and saw that it had leaves, meaning he saw that it is alive. Then he went to see if it had any figs or fruit, but it had none. So this other parable in Luke, he's talking about the master or the owner, whatever you want to call it, however you want to clarify it. he sees he's got a fig tree there, and it hasn't had figs on it for 3 years. It's alive, but it has no fruit. And it's been 3 years now that he's been waiting patiently for it to bear fruit. So he figures he's waited the customary 3 years for it to bear fruit, and it didn't do so. It was alive, it had leaves, but it didn't bear fruit. So therefore it wasn't fulfilling its purpose, and he ordered it to be cut down. Because it was using up his soil, his resources. And then the servant, he basically pleads with him and said, look, man, give it one more year. I'm going to go dig around that thing. I'm going to clean out the rocks and whatever's causing it, whatever's hindering it from growing and bearing fruit, I'm going to do what I can to remove the obstacles, and then I'm going to feed it. I'm going to fertilize it. I'm going to make sure it has the right input in order to produce the fruit. And then in 1 year's time, if it bears fruit, fine. And if it doesn't, well, then we'll cut it down. So I thought it was a message to me, you know, hey, we're all alive, we're all living, but are we bearing fruit? Are we fulfilling our purpose? And I just wanted to share that and see if that hits home with anybody else. If it does, thumbs up and like. Thanks.